Let's take a look at problem 3-18A, where we'll contrast activity-based costing to conventional product cost. So we have the Ilix company, and they manufacture two models of high-fidelity speakers, the X200 and the X99. You see I'm reading here. And we've got annual production of the X200 at 5,400, X99 29,000. We see the total labor hour cost, and over here we see what the direct labor hours per unit are, which is 1.8 and 0.9. So total information says the total direct labor hours are 35,820. All right. We also know that model X200 requires $72 in direct materials per unit cost. I'm just reading A, B, C, and D here. The direct labor rate is $10 an hour. The company has always used direct labor costs as the base for applying manufacturing overhead cost. And then D says model X200 is more complex to manufacture than the model X99, and it requires the use of special equipment. So the company is considering the use of activity-based costing, and we want to see how the product cost will turn out. So they've established three activity cost pools. Machine setups, and they estimate the machine setups will be 355,000. The activity measure would be the number of setups. Special processing, 176,000. The activity measure will be machine hours. Sometimes this is called the driver, right? The general factory, 1,268,000, and that's going to be allocated based on direct labor hours. That's the activity measure. All right, now I slid down and we see that in addition to the activity cost pools, they've gone ahead and made some estimates about the activity per model. So the number of setups will go 50, 100, and 150 in total. Machine hours 12,000, 0, and 12,000. No setup. Or model X99 doesn't require machine hours, right? And direct labor hours 9, 7, 20, 26,100 for a total of 35,820. Now, requirement 1 says compute the predetermined overhead rate, and that's $50.28. And let me show you how we come up with that. Okay, so there's the solution on the screen, $50.28, and they told us there was 1,801,000 of estimated overhead costs, and we need to know what the total direct labor hours will be, and that's given right there, 35,820. So we simply divide the estimated overhead cost by the total direct labor hours, and we come up with the predetermined overhead rate, $50.28. Okay, next we need to calculate the unit product cost of each model, and that comes out to be $108.50 and $110.25 given this particular, the numbers on this particular problem. Well, how did we come up with that? Well, we follow what we see down here. Direct materials was $72.56 for X200 and X99. That's given in the problem. And they told us that at $10 average wage rate, it takes 1.8 direct labor hours for the X200, and it takes 0.9 for the DLH, so that's $18 and $9. And then the manufacturing overhead, we use that 50.28 times 1.8 and times 0.9 respectively. Sum the totals, we come up with the unit product costs. Okay, next we're going to tackle the second part of this question, where we've got the X200 and X99, right? This time I've got what? 1.8, 0.9, 9,000, 25,650, 34,650 total direct labor hours. And reading through the information now, $74 in direct materials per unit. Model X99 requires $46. The direct labor hour is $11. It's the same problem, just different numbers here. And we've got the same comments, but now I'm going to use $1,784,000 as the estimated overhead cost, and the machine hours here. Now, requirement 2 says, assume the company decides to use activity-based cost to apply manufacturing overhead to the cost of products. Compute the predetermined overhead rate for each activity cost pool. All right, let me show you how we come up with that answer. Okay, here we see the $1,425 and the $36, as well as the $2,340 per setup. And so how do we come up with this? We take the estimated overhead cost and divide it by the expected activity. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, next we need to determine the amount of overhead cost that would be applied to each model using the activity-based costing system. We come up with $123.16 for the X200, $40.99 for X99. Well, how do we come up with that? We take the 2,340 answer that we solved previously, the 1425 and the 3642. All of those we solved in the last part of this video, and we multiply it times the number of setups for that particular product, the number of machine hours, and the number of direct labor hours. Right? You see the math. Sum it. We come up with the total overhead cost, and then we divide by the number of units produced, and that was given in the problem, to come up with the overhead cost per unit. And that's where we come up with the $123.16 and the $40.99. Okay, and then finally, we need to compute the unit product cost of each model, which is $216.96 for the X200 and $96.89 per unit for the X99. Well, how do we come up with that? Well, remember we just solved the $123.16 and the $40.99. We're going to need that information, and then we add to it the direct material cost for each one plus the direct labor hours. And remember, they told us 1.8 direct labor hours for the X200 and 0.9 for the DLH. So we just sum the direct material, labor, and overhead cost per unit, and we're able to calculate what the final unit product cost is.